Woohoo! Just had a fantastic flight on the BGD CURE 3, checking the wing for customers. I had a really good day. This is a great test. It's a good thermic day, so a really good variety of conditions. I've got Liam flying over my head. Liam from our Range X-Alps video, currently flying right over me. So, CURE 3. So on the ground, I think you can feel the glider has just a bit more aspect ratio, 6.7, bit like the Phi Scala 2. So there's just that little bit more aspect ratio than some of the other high seas, which is around 6.5, 6.4. Not a massive amount more, but a bit more. And you just notice that, you know, there's a bit more management needed for the tips and things like that. First of all, just simply put, for ground handling, I think it's right for the class. I don't think it's one of the easiest with the high seas, just because of that, maybe the extra aspect ratio, and you just need to take a little bit of care to build your wall out to, otherwise those tips can get caught in the lines a little bit. And also on the inflation, that's one of the key things. It's got a slight, just I think like the Diva 2 does and the Base 3, it's got a slight pause on the inflation. So I think the ground handling feels absolutely right for the class, and that's launching in light winds and also then in stronger winds. Straight away when you're on the ground, you can feel the glider. It definitely feels to me similar, related to the Diva 2 and Base 3. And I don't think it's just because I know they are. It feels it. The design features of it, the high camber, the short lines and the swept tips, all those things. And I guess it's more than that as well, just the way the wings are designed, but they have a familiar feel between them. They do feel like the same part of the same family with similar characteristics. So I do encourage you to check out our reviews of both the Diva 2 and then the Base 3 as well. For comparison, yes, you can straight away tell it's very solid, collapse resistant. Again, all three of the wings are very roddy. They've prioritized having long rods, making the wings, prioritizing making them very collapse resistant, solid, and prioritizing performance over having the wing being lighter and more compact. That does also translate into the ground. I think that's part of the reason the wing's a bit slower to inflate. You notice that with all the wings that are heavier and more roddy. One of the things that, if you've flown other ENC two-liners or even D2 liners, any two-liners, you'll tend to notice a lot of them have quite long brake travel and suffer a bit on the handling, which I've pointed out a number of times. And I still feel like the best three-liners, Sigma 12, DLS and the Arctic 7P, have an edge in handling. But I have to say the CURE 3 has got very nice handling. So I think they've managed to get the benefits of a two-liner and then with better feeling and handling, I think, than I've felt in a lot of other two-liners. But you still have that two-liner feel where they feel very solid and more planky than the three-liner. Brake travel is relatively short. I think the stall point is generally good, very good. It's certainly not sort of vague and light and going to catch you out. So anyone flying the right class of wing should have no issue with the stall at all. The only slight point is, as I mentioned, on the ground, the glider has got a tendency, it needs to get past that sort of 45 to 60 degree angle, and then it's got a slight tendency to drop back if you pull on the brakes. But a pilot flying this level of glider should have no issue with that whatsoever. They should just realise that and allow for it. However, it's not it's not going to forgive you totally misusing it and over abusing the brakes. You do need to be, it is a high sea wing, so it needs a high sea pilot that's allowing for dealing with the stall point, especially when you're flying in choppy active air. The handling is relatively direct and agile. So I'd say it's definitely, along with the Arctic R2, I think they are definitely two of the better, and the Zoom X2C, check our review of that. They are the best handling ENC two-liners in my opinion. They have a more direct feel of handling, they're more responsive, there's less delay, they're more agile. It's easier to turn them in tight, strong, difficult cores. So they're just easier to work and turn in thermals where you really have to turn tight and do that. And the CURE 3 is definitely one of those. I think it also climbs very well. So it's a really good climber. It's one of the best climbers in the class. Very good wing for thermic climbing out and weak stuff. And it also had some quite good, quite punchy cores trying to spit you out. And it feels very solid. The wing does move around and snake around a little bit, similar to the DV2, come to think of it. Snakes and moves around, but then it stays very solid. It's not sort of a collapsy sort of glider. Despite with BGD's progressive stability, and I think there is a little bit of that, but I think you do have with two-liners and this high arc short line design, there's more of a, it's more solid really and collapse resistant. You feel what's happening, you're getting the feedback, very much like the DV2, but not in a kind of tank, I can't feel what's happening. Similar in some ways there to the Photon and Light, but different. It's a bit more feedback and the handling is more agile and nimble. The pilot demands are significantly lower than the DV2 on the CURE. It does feel like a high C. I would definitely put it at the high end of the C class, but it's definitely not it's not a D in C clothing. I think the pilot demands are actually very similar to, say, the Phi Scala 2, and the feeling of it is similar but different. I feel like sometimes pilots might mistake feedback and the glider giving feedback for being less safe. Conversely, they might mistake a glider being more plunky and not giving them feedback to being safer and more collapse resistant. However, they all collapse eventually, even the most collapse resistant, even the parakites with and paramotor wings with very high reflex collapse eventually, and it's how they behave after that really counts. So don't mistake the glider giving you feedback and telling you what's going on for it being less safe. So the CURE 3, I feel like it's a really nice thermaling machine. It's a very efficient and pleasurable thermaling machine. I'd say I don't find it quite as pleasurable as the Sigma 12 three-liner and the Arctic 7P, which for me has got about the nicest, most agile handling of any wing. However, they don't have the two-liner benefits. The difference here when you go onto the two-liner, and the CURE 3 is a true two-liner, is when you're using and flying a lot on the rear risers, particularly when you're on bar, but even when you're just flying actively, it's mostly when you're on bar and you're gliding and using the rear risers to control the wing and to fly efficiently, really, and to fly actively to stop collapses and things, which you can do up to a point with the rear risers. And I think for that, that's where the two-liners have an advantage. And so you only really get that advantage if you're really making use of that part of two-liners. Flying on the rear risers, going onto bar and using the rear risers, it's a very good two-liner. There's a very nice connection there. I think the pressure is kind of moderate. It's not heavy and it's not super light, but I felt like the important thing for me is more that you have a good connection to the wing, which I feel it does, and it works very nicely when you put on the bar. It's very good for flying actively on the rear risers and just controlling your speed as you go in through chop as sporty thermals, and it works very, very well like that. Glider picks up a very good amount of speed. I'd say it feels like one of the quickest of the ENC, the ENC two-liners or any sea glider, and it feels very solid and efficient, very usable and very comfortable on bar, very solid, fast, with a very good performance. Descent techniques, so the big ears with the outer A's, it has split A, which is very easy to reach up, just a line, not a riser. Reasonable amount of pressure, but actually relatively for a two-liner, not that heavy, not too hard to pull in and not hard to hold. They're a little bit flappy, so when I did them a couple of times, and each time they were a bit flappy, not unstable. The glider started to feel a little bit more rolly. Actually, I think that's something I mentioned with the DV2 and I might not have mentioned with the Base 3, is that I think that's one of the things with that high arc, lots of the curved wing. When you do big ears, the glider gets a little bit more rolly, but it feels fine. Get the ears out, when I let go of them, they just stayed in, and I definitely felt like I wanted to pump them out. CURE 3 also does tip stalls, and it does them very well. The lines, they are very thin, not a lot to grab onto, but they are very thin. But the pressure wasn't really high for tip stalls. Tip stalls, the pressure is generally high, but actually they were quite comfortable to pull in and hold. I think from doing both of them, I'd probably use tip stalls mostly on the CURE 3, because that feels like the most stable there. The wing had less tendency for rolling and kept more stable. And of course, as usual with tip stalls, when you let go, they just go poing, pop straight out. No need to pump them out. I think the descent rate with both big ears and tip stalls was quite similar. Oh, my lift is here. Okay, that's it. We're done. That's it for this first impressions review. Hope you've enjoyed this and look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.
CURE 3!